Hey guys, have you ever wanted to understand the physics, the biomechanics, and technique of the WTA forehand and the ATP forehand? We're going to dive right in with part 3 of my WTA forehand analysis, and let's see if any of these pro female players have a ATP type technique. So we looked at Iga, we looked at Coco, we looked at Mira, we looked at Pegula, and Rybakina in previous videos, Navarro with this amazing straight arm forehand. And now we're going to get into part 3, which is Keys, Paolini, and Qinwen. So stay with me and we'll talk about those. If you're interested in the other players that I mentioned, please look at video number 1 and video number 2 in this series. This is part 3, the final analysis in this series. We're going to start with Keys. As you can see, Keys has not kind of like a hybrid. She has a large take back. I think she's been trying to shorten it a little bit, but it's pretty big. So if you look at her backswing here, you can see the racket crossing the plane behind her back. That's about as big as you're going to get on the Pro Tour these days. So what's the problem with that? Well, it's not ATP because it's large. The ATP forehand is typified by a more compact take back. So the take back, you would see the racket on this side of the body rather than on this side of the body. And so that's important to differentiate that when you're looking at a forehand. Is it more of a WTA style or an ATP style? That's a simple way to classify. There's other aspects as well. But, it's right away you look for the size of this thing. How big is that backswing? So she gets good lag. And then at the impact, you can see another aspect of technique where she has a bent arm. Her arm here looks like about 90 degrees. Sometimes it's probably a little less even. So you got something like that at the at impact, and that's pretty common with a lot of female players. And in my mind, that's a lot more WTA style than ATP, because you see ATP players, and we'll see Paolini in a minute. She's a WTA player with an ATP forehand, and she'll have her lever straight here. So what are the problems with this type of thing? Well, we know by the physics that she's not maximizing the lever arm here. If the radius of that swing is longer, she's going to generate more linear velocity at the tip of the racket. So the tip of the racket coming through is actually going to be coming through at maximum speed if she can maximize that lever length. So a lot of female players don't do that. They're a little bit bent. Why do they do that? Probably for comfort, probably for perhaps they don't have the stability or the strength, or perhaps the way they were trained when they were a kid. So there could be a lot of reasons why they don't extend the lever or maximize the lever. But we know it's possible because Paolini does it. So I think that's kind of interesting. What about the backswing? Like, what's the problem with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with it. If you take a bigger backswing, you have more pathway to accelerate the racket. So we know that if you take a giant loop, you can generate a ton of velocity. You can generate a ton of momentum in the racket, and you can hit the ball harder. If you're throwing a punch, if you take a bigger windup, like throw a haymaker punch, you're going to hit somebody harder. And the same way, this is kind of like a haymaker. I come from a martial arts background, and this is kind of like a haymaker type swing, big bubble loop. So you can generate a lot of force from that. The only downside is it's just not compact. It's not quick to the ball. So you may have to step back off the baseline. You may not be able to take the ball as early. The game's getting faster. And so, the concept is we're trying to shorten the backswing, get the backswing maybe over here so that you can handle the speed of the ball coming in the modern game, and you can take the ball earlier. You can position yourself earlier on top of the baseline with smaller, more compact backswings. So that's the issue there. Here, as I mentioned, you're getting less less linear tip velocity, and the radius is shorter. And so, that velocity matters when you calculate the momentum of the angular momentum, that the velocity that you're able to swing at is important. You multiply the mass times the velocity, and you get angular momentum. Basically, you get the moment of inertia, which is influenced by mass, and then you have the angular velocity, and that equals the angular momentum that you have. So in this case, not to get too deep into the physics, but basically when you shorten the lever, you get less linear tip velocity, you get less angular velocity, and then when you calculate that in terms of angular momentum, you get basically less, in layman's terms, less power into the shot. So there's a slight trade-off there, but maybe there's an advantage in terms of being a little quicker with the shorter lever. It's like using a knife. You're a little quicker with the shorter lever. You may not absolutely max out your power, but she doesn't need to max out her power because she's taking this giant loop. So, you put that into the calculus. I use my giant loop to get power, and I'm a little shorter here, maybe for comfort. Maybe this is the way I was coached when I was a kid, coaching tradition. Maybe this is like a comfortable compromise for a lot of female players. Keys tends to hit the ball with less rotation. We'll look at Qinwen, who plays with a lot of spin. Giant loop. What's good here? Really nice open stance setup. Nice wide hips. Great base of support here to explode. Get the ground reaction forces going. So there's a little hop here. I usually recommend coming off the ground, and you can see here a little hop. It's off the ground. Again, a little bit, 90-degree arm position at impact. Really nice with the eyes. Look how the eyes are tracking in here. Quiet eye technique. Evidence-based technique to improve your focus, concentration. Also to keep your head still, to avoid any extraneous movement of the head that could affect the accuracy of the shot. And you see a relatively high finish. You see some inversion here, the racket drifting below the hand. I like when the racket is below the hand here. You see on that finish, I don't know if you guys can see that, the racket below the hand. I like that. And I like that the elbow didn't cross face here. Elbows below the chin on the finish. So this is kind of a modern hybrid WTA forehand with some ATP characteristics in terms of the lag. You see a nice lag here. Check that out, guys. Great lag, bent arm, really good lock-in with the eyes. Some nice semi-open stance work. She's very comfortable with the semi-open stance. This is also typical of more modern swings. Semi-open stances, open stances. Explosion, getting off the ground. A little bit off the ground there. And she's hitting the ball with less spin than some other female players. What's interesting, she's driving the ball here, and watching the next one, she whips it more. She has more wiper, more internal shoulder rotation. I think it's this one, maybe the next one. Okay, look how cleanly she's hitting it. She's hitting hard and clean, flatter, less rotation. Look at her lock-in with the eyes. It's fantastic. Everyone should copy that. You see the chin tucks into the shoulder there? It's fantastic. So she's driving the ball flat here, and check this out. She gets a short ball that's lower, and she's really going to whip this one. Sorry, guys, I lost that one. All right, my apologies there. I was just going to show you that short one. That's really cool. So she's driving the ball flatter with a lot of power. And then she gets this short ball here. Check this out. She takes a giant loop. You can see that. Enormous loop even though the ball is kind of short and low. So you know you're going to get a huge amount of power with that kind of windup. We just know that from the physics and intuitively, logically. And now she gets way under the ball here. Look at this lag. Tremendous, really good whip here. Really nice lag. And then she's going to whip from underneath this low ball. She's going to whip upwards. Check that out. And she's going to get this huge wipering action. Look at this windshield wiper here. She turns the wrist over, like Macy calls that turning the doorknob. And this is basically, there may be some subtle wrist action here, but this is basically internal shoulder rotation. The shoulder's rotating over, and she's turning the doorknob here to get extra spin. She gets a lot of rotation on this low ball. It's a little bit out of the screen here, but if you can see her finish completely changes. And she whips the finish to the side, and she finishes across her, near her ribs, rather than up around the shoulder, as in the other driving swing. So that's really interesting. Look how she changes all the swing mechanics on a low ball here. Look how low the racket is here. You can see that here. The racket's way below the ball here. And she's going to whip upwards to get the extra spin in this particular situation. So it's great that she has that versatility. And everyone should copy that. You get a low ball, you got to whip it more. But it's interesting how she was driving the ball for power. And people say, oh, she's a flat ball hitter. Yeah, but look what she does on a short ball. Short ball, she knows to loosen, to whip, and to create more RPM, more spin on the ball. That's an important lesson. So here's Paolini, which is like a very exciting model, I think, for women. Just to prove that you can do it. She has a very next-gen take-back. It's kind of like Sinner. She turns the strings to the back fence. It's a really interesting model. Look how compact she is compared to Keys. So Keys had the backswing. The racket's way out here, on the take back. She's getting that big windup. And Paolini has the racket hidden behind her back. That's actually very good for disguise. A lot of people don't talk about that, but the mechanics back there are disguised. You can't really see what she's going to do, so you don't get a good read on the shot. That's an important note to highlight. So you can't really see what's happening here. Look, the forehand's just going to come out of nowhere, whatever she's going to do with it. So it's great to hide your backswing there or to keep your backswing here. You get the benefits of compactness, so you save time. You can take the ball earlier with this type of backswing. This is a more ATP, next-gen, modern backswing. And she's turning the hand, she's pronating here, her forearm, and turning the strings to the back fence. And I suspect that there's some biomechanical benefit to that. I'm still trying to figure it out, but players are doing that probably to get some type of better pre-stretch in the shoulder musculature or maybe in the forearm musculature. I believe it's contributing to more racket speed or more spin potential. So I believe that's why players are doing that. In the old days, we always used to change this. Like I used to change this in a lot of players because I used to tell kids, don't turn your racket like that. It's going to be too inconsistent. You're going to shank the ball a lot. But I think we can't say that anymore because you see players like Sinner and countless other players who rotate their forearm like this at the beginning of the swing. And there must be some biomechanical benefit for why they do that. You see Keys doesn't do anything like this. And we'll see Qinwen in a minute. She doesn't do anything like this either. They do more of a traditional WTA takeback. Traditional WTA takeback is the racket vertical. We saw Sabalenka like that. Qinwen does that. Keys does that. Keys is a little like that. This is very different. The tip's pointing that way and the hand's inverted. The racket is inverted. The strings are facing the back. Very interesting. So look how compact she is. So she's maximizing time. She can take the ball really early with this type of backswing. She can get the racket to the ball quicker. So it's a shorter, let's say, pathway or circumference of the swing. So she has a shorter circumference. So that's if you measure the entire pathway of the swing, to the ball, Think about it that way. If you measure this entire pathway from here, around, and then to the ball is a pretty short pathway as compared to Keys, who's going like long pathway, long circumference, you know. Think about it that way. Short circumference, short pathway, and now watch this. Maximal lever. Unbelievable. And to me, this is the prototypical modern, look at the eyes locked into, modern ATP with next-gen take-back. So just in terms of terminology, she's maximizing her lever length. She's optimizing her backswing in terms of the circumference of the swing. The pathway is shorter, so she's got a short compact take-back and maximizing the lever length. And when you do that, you kind of get the dream technique, the most optimal in my mind, because you're maximizing the physics of the swing in terms of the radius, in terms of tip velocity. You know, out here you're getting maximal tip velocity. You are, if you combine angular velocity with the long lever, you know, if you can maintain angular velocity with the long lever, you maximize the speed, the linear speed of the tip here. So that's really, really important. And then when you combine that with the compact backswing, which saves time, you get the full package. That's the modern swing. Why are players doing that? Because the game's so fast, they want to maximize the physics of the swing. And the game's so fast, they want to save time so they can take the ball earlier and be prepared earlier. So you have shorter backswing, longer lever. That is like the ultimate combination. Look at the lag here. The other aspect is all the players are using these lightweight rackets that they can whip through the zone here. This is something I talked about in a new article that I've written about the physics of the tennis forehand, and that article is coming out it's on my Medium page if you're interested in my writing. It's also on tennisplayer.net, will be published this month, which is a great magazine, technical magazine, John Yandel's magazine. But basically, you know, this is you can make a very good case for the physics of this type of swing. And then she adds the next gen take back here. So she's got the trifecta, like the next gen take back, compact backswing, where the racket's actually, the work of the racket's basically hidden here behind her back, which is good for disguise. That's a bonus. And then maximizing the lever arm to get maximal tip velocity. You know, this is really optimal. And then she's going to whip through, and she finishes, interestingly, a little more outside, you know, rather than following through close to her body. She whips around, and so she's got a big arc, a big parabolic swing here. And she finishes, she doesn't cross face, which is good. She keeps her shoulder below her eye level, and she finishes relaxed around her body. This is a higher finish, so she didn't invert here. That's interesting. Let's see if she inverts in another one. Boom. Look at the whip. So anytime you see lag like this, you know that she's super mobile and she's super relaxed. You have to stay loose in your distal joints to make this lag happen. And this is critical. So you have a lightweight racket, stiff lightweight rackets, modern rackets, allow you to whip the racket head through like this, creating lag. Lag, and remember, the wrist here, the wrist is not being activated concentrically. This is an eccentric movement, most likely, of the wrist contractors, the wrist flexors. The wrist is not activating here. The wrist is actually modulating the tip of the weight and the tip of the racket being flung through here. So this is a modulation effect of the wrist. So the wrist extensors are acting eccentrically here to control what's happening with the racket head, rather than, don't look at this as a snap. Don't look at this as a concentric snap of the wrist flexors. That may happen at slow speeds, certain angle shots, I argue, but on a full power swing, the tip of this racket, the mass of this racket is being flung through, basically due to the forces of the kinetic chain. And the wrist, paradoxically, the wrist extensors are controlling the tip of the racket. So when we say use your wrist, I say that to students all the time, use your wrist. Use your wrist here. What we really mean scientifically is allow the racket tip to come through more or less eccentrically. We don't mean use your wrist concentrically, like in terms of contracting wrist muscles. We're talking about relaxing wrist muscles or using the wrist extensors eccentrically to control the head of the racket. So that's what we mean by using the wrist. We all say that, use the wrist. But maybe it's more correct to say, let your wrist move or control the angle of your wrist, or let the wrist come through. Let the wrist come through more would be perhaps a more precise way to say it to students. Check this out. So here we see the racket a little bit behind, maybe a slightly bigger swing here. It depends on the camera angle, but much more compact than Keys, right? And then she maximizes lever arm here. Look how low she is. She's playing with a lot more topspin. You can tell here the relationship between the racket head and the ball. This is a good example. She's not contracting the wrist muscles here. She's not flexing the wrist here. The racket tip is being flung through, is being whipped through, and she's allowing that racket head to fly forward by staying loose. And there's got to be activation of the extensors. If the extensors were not activated here eccentrically, the racket would fly through uncontrollably. So that's important to understand in terms of the biomechanics. If she wasn't using her wrist extensors, the racket tip would just be out of control, would just basically like slap through here. So there has to be some modulation with the wrist extensors. There has to be, to sort of control the acceleration of the mass of the racket here. Yeah, it looks like a lot of times she has a little bit higher finish, Paolini. But this is like the dream for a lot of coaches. Say females can't do this, and that's why I'm so proud to show this. Look, a lot of coaches say this is not possible for women, but obviously it is. This is heavy topspin here. Look how she's lagged, super relaxed, super whippy. She gets under the ball here. There's going to be a heck of a lot of tops around this. Look how whippy that the racket comes through. So we say, use the wrist. It looks like she's using her wrist, right? I mean, her wrist is moving, but this is not concentric action of the wrist. This is an effect generated from all of the other forces in the kinetic chain. So it's a passive movement of the wrist, eccentrically controlled. Yeah, a little bit traditional finish here. So you can see, we've seen in some other male players we've analyzed on the Pro Tour, you can finish up like this as long as you're relaxed. So it's kind of a high finish, not my favorite type of finish. I like more of an inverted finish down here. But I mean, you know that she's super whippy and relaxed, so it doesn't matter. You can finish high if you're super relaxed. The problem is a lot of people finish high up here, and they're stiff as a board. So this is a really special technique by Paolini for a female player, very, very special and rare technique that I think you'll see becoming more common for females because girls can do it. A lot of coaches think that girls can't do it and they just let them swing with a bent arm, but it's not really true. Very special technique. She also has an ATP backhand here, super compact backhand. Look at that. Backhand on this side of the body. A lot of women have their backswing on this side of the body. That's even more conducive to taking the ball early and dealing with the pace of today's modern game. All right, and finally, let's look at Qinwen, Olympic champion. Very, very interesting. Look at this. Classic WTA. Look how high that backswing is. Vertical backswing. Classic WTA backswing. Vertical. Sorry, vertical here. And look how the racket's going to take a very long pathway, so very long circumference to the ball, whereas Paolini had a very short circumference to the ball. So who's going to be better at taking the ball on the rise here? Or who's going to be better at handling pace here? It's going to be the shorter backswing because you can get the racket to the ball quicker. Saves you a little time. It's not essential because, you can still be a great pro, and Qinwen's amazing, and she can back up off the baseline and still hit the ball really hard. But it just limits you a little bit. It's just not quite as optimal. You see the backswing here is kind of in the, maybe a little bit less than Keys, but similar to Keys. The racket's behind the plane, crosses the plane, crosses behind the back. So you get a lot of power from this buildup. Imagine all the racket's dropping with gravity. Imagine the acceleration you can get with this big windup. The racket drops down and then it accelerates through. So this is a huge windup. You're gonna get this is a big haymaker. Very good lag. And Qinwen plays with a lot of topspin, which is great for female players. A lot of coaches think female players can't do it. She plays with good topspin. She's trained a lot in Spain. She spent a lot of her formative years in Spain. And so you can see where the setup is here. The racket's swooping. It's a little hard to see in this with these frames, but the racket's below the ball, and she's going to accelerate upwards here with great internal shoulder rotation. This wiper is ISR. This is internal shoulder rotation. When you see the racket going from here around, that's ISR. It's not so much wrist action. There's wrist action here. Remember, passive wrist action. The racket's being flung through. And then really good ISR here. You can see the wipering action. And that's because she plays with good spin. This is more of my preferred follow-through. Inverted racket. See, the racket is down below the hand here. And she doesn't cross face. The arm stays below the chin, which I like. This is a nice relaxed finish here. Look at the racket. She accelerated so much, the deceleration phase took the racket all the way across to the other side of her body there. So is it a WTA or ATP swing? This is a hybrid, kind of like a type 2. Maybe not the biggest backswing you've ever seen, but pretty big. And it's a very high backswing. The backswing goes way up there. So it's WTA swing with ATP characteristics. So we call it a hybrid, Really good spin and whip. You can see the lag, super mobile, super relaxed. It's almost exactly like Paolini there. What about the arm structure? It's not fully maximized. She doesn't maximize the lever. You can see she could be farther away from the ball. Spacing could be better, and she could slightly maximize the tip, the linear velocity of the tip of the racket. If she had a slightly longer radius here, she could maximize the tip velocity. But she's a little more extended than Keys, let's say. But as we know, many female players who are making millions of dollars have this structure, this bent arm, and they're hitting the ball very hard. So maybe they're losing a few miles per hour, but they have a little more comfort here, or slightly more compaction here, compact nature. So it still works, but I can make a good case for the physics that it's slightly suboptimal, but it's not the end of the world. Obviously, she has a great world-class forehand, just with a slightly big backswing. Positives are a loose, whippy arm, slightly suboptimal on the impact point because you'd like to get the longer lever to get the faster linear tip speed, and very good whip for topspin. Here's another one. There we go. This is sort of like historically kind of like the WTA straight vertical wrist. Remember, Paolini was here and had the strings inverted. And we've seen a lot of female players who do this vertical take back. A lot of wind up. See how long the racket's staying up here? Look how high this is. It's very high. And the racket's going to drop down with gravity, and she's going to get a big, a lot of buildup. She has a long pathway to build up power, so she's going to hit the ball really hard here. Really good topspin swing. Look how low she is here, way below the ball. She's going to come up from underneath. The tip's going to fly through here, and she has a little more extension than, let's say, Keys. So I can do a better job of measuring. Well, probably she looks a little more obtuse, over 90 degrees in Keys. A lot of the swings are similar to Keys at sometimes, 90, 100 degrees maybe. And she has tremendously good wiper. Like, look, I love this wipering action. She gets a lot of spin from this wiper. And a very loose finish. I wanted to show you just briefly. Look at this one, high and outside. This is most players now will do this type of follow through. They'll go up and around the head. I've documented this and analyzed it in part 1 and part 2, and in some of the ATP videos I've done. Check those out if you're interested. But when the ball's high and outside, so when players are moving laterally and the ball bounces high, look at the extension here. This is much better. So she's over 100 degrees here. She's got better extension here. She's reaching probably more than she feels comfortable, to be honest. But this would actually be better extension in terms of the physics. And then when players are catching balls up here in the strike zone, you're typically seeing them do a reverse finish, the wrap around. Watch this, she wraps it around her head, and she flares out to the side here. This is like Alcaraz, many pro players now. Rude comes to mind. So many players are doing this swing. I'm going to do another video soon about this type of follow through, because it's becoming not just a specialty shot, it's becoming like a standard follow through. Alcaraz does this so much now. It's wild. Rafa Nadal made this very popular. So, but this is a classic situational time where players do this type of follow through a lot. So look for this. When the ball's high and outside, it feels comfortable to wrap the follow through around your head like that. You can see that she's going to bring the racket up there. She's right above her head here. It looks kind of weird, the position of the elbow. It's coming from a classical teaching perspective, it's really bizarre how many players are doing this nowadays. And I'd like to do another video or two really talking about this particular type of backswing, because it's actually like a very novel way to swing. And I'd like to try to dive into why players are doing this more and more frequently these days on the Pro Tour. Probably has to do with spin, probably has to do with tactical intention, and probably has to do with the amount of racket speed they're generating. It makes it comfortable to come around, to whip around the head like this. I call this the lasso. I've done a few videos on this. Look how the racket flares out at the end here. It's kind of cool. But this is a very interesting technical development that's been happening the last decade or so on the tour, both tours. I was watching Alcaraz recently, and he was doing this type of swing almost maybe more than 50% of his forehand. So this is not just a specialty technique anymore. This is becoming standard type of follow through on the Pro Tour, which is a fascinating technical development. All right, guys, so we looked at Keys and Qinwen, who are two examples of hybrid forehands. Qinwen hits with more whip and spin than Keys, but they're both kind of hybrid WTA, ATP. They have characteristics of both. We talked about backswing and straight arm mechanics, the lever mechanics, lever at impact, the radius of the swing. We talked about the wipe ring action, ISR. We talked about the wrist and whether the wrist action is active or more passive, concentric or eccentrically controlled. And then we looked at Paolini, who is this really, really cool, high-tech, cutting-edge, the most modern forehand you can see for a female player, where she has the compact backswing, she has the next-gen setup with the forearm pronation, and she has an ultra extended arm like Navarro. She's got the straight arm lever, maximizing the radius of the swing and maximizing the linear tip velocity of the racket. So very interesting that Paolini has a full next-gen ATP model for a female player, and the other pros that we've seen have sort of a mixture. They have sort of a hybrid. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. We have 3 parts. Check out all videos in the series. Leave me any comments or technical questions. I enjoy going over the biomechanics of the pros with you guys. It's a lot of fun for me, and I hope you enjoyed it too.